Okay.
Okay, we're live streaming. Just let me know when you want us to actually start.
I'm ready. All right, is the floor mine?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is my first time chairing the TAC meeting in quite some time, probably several years, at least several years. So bear with me as I get my bearings and refamiliarize myself with this role. Really, three quick goals I jotted down is number one is I want to try to keep us focused and on topic. Number two, I'd like to make sure that everybody that wants to speak has the opportunity to speak and be heard. Lastly, I want to spend the time that is needed on each of these topics, but at the same time, would like to get us out as quickly and efficiently as possible. So those are my three goals. And so with that in mind, Chad, I turn it over to you to tell us about or provide the statement on virtual meetings.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome. Congratulations again on being chair. We don't have any updates really on the virtual meeting platform. We continue to use it as long as we are able. It has provided the members a lot of flexibility and efficiency to be able to set up your day. So I think the group consensus is that we're going to continue to do that as long as we're able. And we do have the agendas are set up so that at the top of the agenda, there is a link for anyone to register and join the meeting as an attendee. If there are anyone who wishes to speak as a member of the public, that is a platform to do it. And we welcome the public to participate in these meetings. Yes,
absolutely. There was one thing I failed to mention. I am going to have to cut out at 10 a.m. Our county administrator has called a impromptu department meeting. We do have a vacancy. I imagine it's probably some announcement regarding that, and they said I should be present. So if I can turn and forgive me, I don't recall who is vice chair.
That's Gary Mitchell.
Is okay. I see Gary's on the call. If Gary is able to, Gary, if you're able to take over at 10, I would appreciate it. Okay, we'll deal with that when we get there. Thank you. Ms. Firestone, would you do the roll call and certification of a quorum, please?
Yes, sir. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos.
Here.
Charles City County Vice Chair Mitchell.
Here. Here.
Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Miss Walker. Goochland County, Mr. Goyne.
Here.
Mr. Coleman. Hanover County, Chair Vidunez.
Here.
Henrico County, Miss Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Yor. New Kent County, Miss Inman. Miss LeDuc.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Miss Clark.
Morning. Here.
Good morning. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. DRPT, Mr. Vinsky.
Here.
Mr. Wagner.
Here.
GRTC, Ms. Sink. Mr. Robinson. Ms. Robinson.
I'm here. Thank you.
Mhm. Plan RBA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel. Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe. RMTA, Ms. Simmons. VDOT, Ms. Rhodes.
Here.
And Ms. Mueller. That concludes the roll call for attendance, and we do have a quorum.
Excellent. So that brings us to our next item, number 4, consideration of amendments to the agenda. Do we have any proposed amendments to the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, we can move on to our next item, which is approval of the June 13th, 2023 TAC meeting minutes. Do we have any changes or amendments to the minutes?
Mr.
Okay.
Chair,
Yes, Dorona.
so moved that we approve the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion from Dorona. Do we have a second?
Sharon Smidler, second.
Sharon, second. So this is a voice vote. So do I call for the voice vote? Yes. Yes, okay. So all in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Is there any opposition?
This is Kelly. I should probably abstain. I wasn't at that meeting from New
Okay.
County.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yep.
The motion passes, the minutes are approved. That brings us to number 6 on our agenda, which is the public comment period. Do we have anybody on the call, or have we received any comments?
We have not.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll close that item and we'll move to the TAC chairman's report. At this time, I don't have anything additional to report. So we will get into the meat of our agenda, beginning with Miles. Miles has the next 4 items, Miles. So you're up, beginning with the carbon reduction program guidelines.
Chairman, members of TAC. This first item is the proposed guidance for the carbon reduction program. If you recall, a few months back, we presented a very quick overview of the carbon reduction program. And it's a new funding program from the bipartisan infrastructure law, very similar to CMAQ, but focused on carbon dioxide emissions rather than on the precursors for ozone that we focus on with CMAQ. So eligibilities are very similar as well. One of the key distinctions is that it applies to the full MPO study area and not just the maintenance area that CMAQ applies to. So the original VDOT recommendation was for that initial round of funding was to use it to augment the CMAQ program, which is what we did. We used the previous funding to replace CMAQ funds and freed up CMAQ for other projects. So the current balance you can see here for each year, but basically we have about 2.3 million per year for this program. So it's fairly small. Wouldn't be able generally to pick a lot of projects just with carbon funding because of the limited amount. So what staff is proposing is to add it to our framework, the existing framework document, using the same model that we did for CMAQ. So basically we score the same projects all the exact same way, just like we do for a surface transportation block grant, with the added requirement of demonstrating that emissions reduction. We would do that either using the CMAQ workbooks that just like we do with CMAQ, or as part of the scenario planning pilot, we're also improving our mobile emissions model to include greenhouse gases. The other big changes that are proposed would be replacing all the references to SDBG CMAQ to flexible regional funding. So we can kind of cover our bases. And then if any future programs get added, it would also be covered already. So we wouldn't have to replace as much in the document. And then projects that are submitted for funding would just be considered for all three of the sources if they're eligible. So it's really just streamlining it so that we can cover all the different programs. Here's an example of the prioritization. This is just a quick work through, but basically, if you have your projects, they would all go into the same scoring process and be ranked and prioritized. And then we would look and see which funding programs they're actually eligible for. So if it's a bike ped project, for example, it could go into CMAQ or carbon reduction as well, as long as we can demonstrate that benefit. And then as we work our way down the prioritized list, we would just pull from the funding source that's appropriate based on the size of the project and the eligibilities. So it's just an attempt to streamline it. But again, it's making everything consistent with the Connect RVA with the long range plan in the scoring, and then putting all the funding together as an attempt to put a more comprehensive approach rather than keeping the pots separate, especially given the size of the carbon reduction program. So the action that's requested is to provide a recommendation to the policy board to approve updates to the regional funding framework to include the carbon reduction program as presented. In your agenda packets are the relevant pages where we added the definitions for the carbon reduction program, and then the scoring process for that program as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about this.
All right, thank you, Miles. Are there any questions? I do have one. Do we have any questions? If not, I do have one question, maybe two. What is the soft match that's shown here? What is that comprised of, or where does that come from?
So that's the state match. And Sarah, you can probably weigh in on this. My understanding is that's like toll credits that count as part of the match requirements, but doesn't actually require a cash contribution the same way that we normally do. And Sarah, if you want to weigh in more on that piece.
That's-
You nailed it, Miles, and that's
Okay.
how we match RSTP and CMAQ.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And I guess one, you, Miles, you had that funding matrix kind of use as an example. Yes. Am I correct that you would probably look to assign the CRP funds first, if possible, being that they are so specific and more limited than RSTP, for example?
Yes, so that's how we did it this last round as well. We went through the CMAQ projects first and then backfilled in with the RSTP funding. So it's the same idea that we would start with the more limited funding source and then also, for scale of projects as well, try and get the smaller projects with CRP, then the next batch with CMAQ.
Right. Okay. That sounds good. So the TAC action that is requested would be a resolution that the TPO adopt the regional funding framework to include the carbon reduction program as Miles has presented here. There it is on the screen. Okay, so do I have a motion?
This is Barb, so moved.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
That's Gary. Okay, we have a motion and a second. This is, I believe, a roll call vote. So Janice, would you call the vote?
Yes, give me 1 second. I need to pull my document back up. I had a little trouble there. All right, sorry about that. Miss Amos,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell,
Aye.
Mr. Goyne,
Aye.
Chair Vadunez,
Aye.
Miss Smidler,
Aye.
Miss Leduc,
Aye.
Miss Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Miss Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
and Miss Rhodes.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Okay.
I
Thank
think you
you.
missed me, but I'm in favor as well. This is Barb.
Sorry.
I guess that's the assumption. I made the motion, right?
Yes, that was my fault. I had Ms. Walker listed from the last meeting and didn't call her because she's not present today, but I will update that with your name. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, so Miles, the next item is yours as well, concerning the endorsements of the transportation alternatives applications that are being prepared.
Thank you again. This item is endorsement for the TAP projects. As you're all familiar, TA is generally oriented towards the active transportation projects and programs. The policy for transportation alternatives requires the MPO to endorse any projects in our study area. And both the MPO and CTB have project selection responsibility. So we have a pot of money, CTB has money to select projects with. There were 19 applications that were received through the pre-app process. The final applications are due by October 2nd. So the review that we did was we looked at all the projects that had been submitted, and you've seen this all before, but this is the Connect RVA 2045 consistency review. So basically, if a project is regional, it needs to be in the constrained plan. If it is a local or a programmatic project based on our framework, then it's automatically eligible. So we screened each of the projects using this process, and that's attached to your staff report. We also reviewed all the projects against the bike ped plan, just trying to identify which ones were included in the new bike ped plan, particularly any that were regional spines or spurs, which is kind of the core of the regional network. Everything was, everything was local and programmatic except for one project, which was regional and was listed in the constrained plan. So the action that's requested is the same resolution template we've used for the last 3 rounds. So it's basically, whereas we're required to endorse projects to move forward, whereas 4 localities have indicated an intent to submit the projects with that full project list. Therefore, the TPO endorses these projects as applications for the FY 25-26 transportation alternative set-aside process. And that's the full action. This is a recommendation to the policy board for approval at their September meeting. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dorona has her hand raised, and then Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question for Miles. I was just looking at the table that was submitted in the agenda, and I was just trying to get a little clarity on the staff recommendation column.
Sure. So that was an old version of it, and I'm sorry, that's been amended. So that was a column that was meant to be left out, that wasn't part of the original screening. So if I can pull up the revised table if it's helpful. But basically everything met the criteria, and that was a column that we didn't intend to use and wasn't updated, but accidentally got put out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask this about the same thing, so thank you for that. Austin?
Yeah, I see in the agenda item that I guess requests were sent to the sponsors for projects to get the details. We submitted a project kind of last minute at the deadline at the 11th hour for TA. It's been through the screening process with VDOT and everything. So I want to make sure we're added into this. And if I missed a request from TPO staff to get information, I've been in and out over the last 3 weeks with vacation and illness. So I apologize if I missed something, but I just want to make sure our project is covered as well.
I did not have that one, so we would need to add it on there, onto the list.
We weren't intending to submit one. We were waiting on a comp plan amendment that our board passed, I think 3 days before the deadline. So we were kind of waiting on that. We had everything teed up with VDOT and submitted it the day of the deadline.
Okay. Yeah, we would just need to add that one on here, Austin. So I think that would be a revision to the original staff list.
Okay.
Would you need to review that, Miles, to ensure that it does meet eligibility?
Yes, so we would, and if it's tax direction, we'd be able to review that prior to the policy board if we want to advance it.
Okay, so it'd be added to the list contingent upon being eligible for the recommendation going forward. Yes, okay. Dorona?
Yep, just a quick question to Austin.
Mhm.
I know you mentioned the VDOT. Do you know if it's like going to be a local or the regional type of project?
It's going to be a local. It's 2,500 foot of sidewalk in our courthouse village. That's all the project is.
Okay, great.
So I can just clarify. I just took a look really quickly. So it was not listed as within the TPO area on the data that we had. So that's how it got screened out.
Gotcha.
And it's probably because of the old MPO boundaries.
Okay.
So we can definitely add that one, assuming everything screens in.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, let's see. All right, so I need a motion in a second.
I'll make the motion. I guess would it have to be as amended or as discussed to amend? Is that?
Yeah, that sounds appropriate to add the Goochland Courthouse project, sidewalk project.
So then, yeah, I'll move to approve the list as amended pending, I guess, TPO staff review of the Goochland Courthouse sidewalk project.
Okay,
Second from Barb.
okay, great. Okay, so we have a motion from Austin, second by Barb, to endorse the list to be forwarded to the TPO with the addition of the Goochland project, subject to eligibility review. So with that, Janice, that is another roll call vote, if you would call for the vote.
Ms. Amos,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mitchell,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goyne,
Aye.
Chair Badunez,
Aye.
Ms. Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Leduc,
Aye.
Ms. Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
and Ms. Rhodes.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, Miles, the floor's yours again.
So the next one that I have for you is a request for the Bon Air Pedestrian Improvements Project for additional funding. So this is a Chesterfield County project. It is ready to advance into construction, but the estimate has increased significantly as we've seen across the board recently. The county does have a no post in place, but they are seeking assistance as a large driver of this increase has been just general inflation. The current schedule is advertising now, award by October, and there is no available TA funding. So this is a TAP project, but the TPO does have other funding sources like the carbon reduction or CMAQ program that we discussed earlier, which could help cover the increase. The total increase based on the sponsor estimate is 1.2 million. So this is a sketch of the project. So it's a mix of signage, trails, and sidewalks throughout the Bon Air area, pretty close to our old office location. And as I mentioned, this project is ready to move forward into construction at this point. So the feasibility of this, TAC can approve up to $94,400 in funding. Anything beyond that would require the policy board to approve it. After reviewing with VDOT, we do not have any TAP funding that could be used to transfer to this request. However, we do have carbon reduction and CMAQ funding, which could be used without any impact to our reserve policy or our other projects. So the FY24 carbon reduction program, if you recall, we only tapped into the previous carbon funding. We didn't use the current fiscal year, waiting to have more of a policy in place. But that's $2.2 million that we could potentially tap into. Additionally, there's a CMAQ closeout, which we'll also talk about on the next item, with 2.1 million in funding that could be used for meeting some of this request. The key consideration here for TAC is that this project hasn't been selected for those programs. But in keeping with that comprehensive approach to funding, kind of what we just talked about with the CRP and how that framework is evolving, and with our recent practice of pulling funds from all sorts of sources, I think this is consistent on that front. So that's a consideration for TAC, since TA funds are somewhat separate from the rest of everything that we do. So the request, there's no specific staff resolution on this one, but essentially we're asking TAC to review this request, take a look at those two funding programs, and we can provide any detail needed, and then determine whether to fund any or all of this project request and from which of those funding sources. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions about the request.
Sharon, you have your hand raised.
Good morning. I just had a comment because funding for existing CMAQ projects were turned down, during the last application cycle. And so I just want to raise awareness that, this is another funding source, TA, and we're not funding existing CMAQ projects, but we're looking at funding TA projects. Now, granted, I'll give you the point that some of the CMAQ projects that weren't funded during the last application cycle, existing CMAQ projects that weren't funded during the last application cycle, were not immediately ready for construction. And one of the questions, maybe for the county, has the county offered to bring any funding to the table instead of the full Delta?
Yes, this project is a TAP project. So already we've got the 20% that's going towards the project to match the federal TAP money. We are willing to split the difference between the $1,200 or $1.2 million ask and put 600 of local funding on the project. If we can get 600 from a flexible funding source, I think is what it's called. Sorry, my video keeps going in and out.
No, that's fine. We can hear you perfectly. So thanks for that update.
Dorona.
All right, let me cut my camera on. I'm trying to, I was of course multitasking, but so is the ask, so Miles, what's the funding that we're trying to use, the carbon reduction funding? I'm a little confused here.
Sure. So staff hasn't identified a particular program. So the program that this is coming from originally is TAP. And since we don't have any balance sufficient to cover any of this, we looked at other options that are available to the TPO. So we have the carbon reduction and the CMAQ pots that would be potentially available here. And again, we were trying to find funding sources that wouldn't impact our current projects or our reserve targets. So we're keeping the reserves intact for anything else that comes up because we are very early in this fiscal year.
So I just had another quick question. And so it talks about approving the 10% and any additional.
Sure.
So clearly they don't want the 10%, but they wanted to move to the policy board for more.
Exactly. But TAC, in reviewing this, could recommend just to do the TAC approved amount. So this is kind of a very open-ended discussion on this one. Staff didn't have a clear direction to provide for you, so we wanted to bring this for a full discussion.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, and so when you talk about other funding, this would be past year's funding. And would there be anything against this being, or because it's already a project, would it be eligible like for this funding round to ask for the complete amount, or that's 600 larger amount?
So the timeline, or what we're trying to meet right now, is that the project is expected to start construction. I think the bids will be opened in September and started construction by October. So we need to have that funding in place in time for that. So there's not enough time to wait until the usual process all the way out until the spring.
We did explore that option though, to see if we could go through the process and swap money between TAP projects so that the years would line up with this project. This project is going right now to construction. So we can't wait for the allocations in 27 or 28, whatever it would be with the new funding cycle. But we weren't able to work that out with central office.
Mhm. I mean, Mr. Chair, would TAC be amenable to? Because Barb, you said that you could do 600,000.
Yes, yeah, we would, we'd like to go halvesies with the TPO on this one and split the funding shortfall.
Well, I can agree with that, but Mr. Chair, thank you.
Right. Yes, I also think that's very reasonable. So I would support that as well. I like the idea of splitting the cost on things. So if there are no other questions or comments, we'll need a motion to that effect or something different.
I can make a motion.
Oh, Austin, excuse me, Barb, Austin just raised his hand.
Yeah, it's fine. I had a last second question. Is the motion also supposed to cover which source this comes from?
Yes, at the current discussed amount of 600,000, I would recommend the carbon reduction program due to the next item that's on the agenda as well.
Okay.
Hey, Barb.
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we recommend to the TPO allocating 600,000 in carbon reduction program funding to the Bon Air sidewalk project.
I'll second.
Okay, I'm sorry. So we have motion and we do have a second. So this one also is a roll call vote, I believe. Janice, if you would call the roll, please.
Mr. Chair, I have discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please.
Just one quick question. Miles, what carbon reduction funding is this? The amount that we were just using for overruns from the first allocation cycle? Or what is this 2.2? Like, what is this?
That is the
pot
total
money?
pot for fiscal year 24. So when we awarded the carbon reduction funding in the spring, we only looked at previous fiscal years and we left the current year untouched because we didn't have a clear direction on what we wanted to do with it. So this is moving it toward actually starting to pick some projects with the current funding there. So that's really, this will be for backfilling for the rest of this year. For fiscal year 24, we'll be using it to cover surpluses. Covering overruns. And then we have a policy now that the TAC just recommended that we would then be using for moving forward with additional projects.
So FY25 carbon reduction money or FY24 carbon reduction money?
For this request, it would be 24. And then for 25 onward would be the next round of allocations that we would select in the spring.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
Okay, are we all straight? Any more discussion on this item before we call for a vote? Okay, Janice?
Okay, Miss Amos,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mitchell,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goin,
Aye.
Chair Vadunez,
Aye.
Ms. Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Leduc,
Aye.
Mr. Shardine, I'm sorry, Ms. Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
and Ms. Rhodes.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Excellent. Okay, so we're doing great on time. So let's try to keep it going. Miles, this is your last one. Another deficit issue.
Thank you again. So this is a CMAC project deficit on an existing project, UPC 15955. This is the Route 1 intersection improvements at Hopkins and Harwood. So this is a legacy project, dates back, it's a 5-digit UPC. And the TPO has been involved since about 2012, I believe. This project had a significant rescoping in 2018 to reduce the cost. In your agendas, there's a cost breakdown over the history of the project. You can see there's a significant drop there. So the scope cannot be reduced anymore. The cost increase in this case, again, has just been driven by the general inflationary environment. And the deficit has actually put this project on hold. It was ready to go to add back in January, but there's been this funding gap that needs to be resolved. So this project would be ready to move into advertisement and construction as soon as we can fill this deficit. So here's just a quick overview of where that's at. So you see it's an offset intersection, and the intent of this project is to improve the intersections and the flow through there. Staff has reviewed this one for feasibility as well, and we've identified a previous project in the CMAC program, our previous funding on a project in the CMAC program that's being canceled. So we had the I-64 express barge expansion, which was awarded a few years back, I think around 2018. The port has found another way to acquire barge during the COVID period, and so the funding was no longer needed on that project. So there was a surplus previous balance of 2.1 million. When we did the allocations in the spring, we didn't find a way to use it yet, but this would be a good way to use up most of that funding. And the transfer could be completed pretty quickly. So if the TAC recommends and the TPO approves, we get the funds transferred, get this project moving into construction. In the staff report, we do weigh both sides of this. It is a significant increase to the TPO's contribution. We're more than doubling the amount of CMAC funding that's on the project. However, it is a larger deficit. The city is covering more than half of the deficit that's on this project right now. And this is an opportunity to get rid of another one of the legacy projects from our program and move forward with more of just the current projects, which I think we explored this past spring, a lot of the history of the projects, where the legacies were. And I think there was a very clear commitment from the TAC and the policy board to funding those legacy projects and moving them forward. We had 3 legacy projects that received additional funding in the spring. So with that, staff felt comfortable recommending in favor of this. So the request here is that the TPO would approve the transfer of $1.587314 million in CMAC funding from the barge expansion project to the Route 1 intersection improvements at Hopkins and Harwood project. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. VDOT is administering, and they're also prepared to answer any general questions about the request as well.
Sharon, please.
Hi, just a quick question. Why wasn't this brought forward in the spring as one of the legacy projects ready for construction with the shortfall? Was it the timing, or you could just clarify?
Sure, it was a timing issue, and also because it's VDOT administered, there was a bit of a delay in getting it to us because it has to go through the city. And So that was really what led to the issue. So that's what brought it to us now, because now they've pieced together the other component of the funding. They've reviewed the cost estimate and really gotten a clear number on exactly how much is needed from the TPO.
Thank you, Miles.
I do have a question. And it concerns the betterment. So there was it stated in here that I forget the amount exactly, but City Council is going to contribute 2.1 million for utility betterments. So is that the entire cost of the betterment, or is that just a portion of the betterment? Does anybody know the answer to that question? I guess what I'm getting at is on Hanover County projects, when we have a utility betterment, that cost is borne 100% by our public utilities section, since it's an addition to the project that's not required in order to construct and complete the project. So it's just kind of worded that that's like supplemental funding that's being provided, when in fact, my view is that cost should not really be counted as part of the deficit. That's a cost to be borne by whoever is requesting the betterment. And I know it's the same organization, all City of Richmond. Barb?
Yeah, I agree with that perspective as well, that betterment really is not something that should be considered as a contribution to the project. It's something to upgrade the utilities in the area, and the way it's treated in a project is really very separate from the road work.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, I can definitely check and get clarity on that. I just do know that here in the city, our utilities run down the middle of the street. And so sometimes those betterments are there. There's no need to not do them when they're being planned. But I do understand your points, but I would have to get a point of clarity. I just do know that a lot of our utilities are in the middle of the street and not along the sides. But Miles, I know you brought this one to me from VDOT, if you want to add any additional points.
Hi, Miles, I might be able to help. So the betterment cost is incorporated into the total cost of the project. So the CMAQ funding goes towards fully funding the project, but we've also increased the estimate to incorporate the betterment. And so the betterment cost is going on the project, and that will fully fund the project. I believe that is the intention.
And if I can just add, the other funding that's available on this project or on this project is legacy construction formula funding. So it is, it was all controlled at the time by the city. So this is, there's a lot of funding on here that is city directed or city money, separate and apart from the CMAQ. So the CMAQ has always been a small portion of this project.
Yeah, I would note that this resolution would make the CMAQ $3 million. All the remaining funding on the project is urban formula.
So Sarah, if you could just clarify, I just want to make sure I understand. So the total cost of betterments is 2.1 million, and that is being paid for 100% by city council contribution.
So I wasn't aware of the total cost of the betterment, so we do need to clarify that, but the estimate on the project incorporates the betterment.
Okay. I think, I don't want to hold this up, but in the staff report, if there could be more clarity around that particular item, presuming that this resolution passes and goes forward. I would like to see that in the report.
Yes, we can definitely add more information.
Yes, and I just reached out to the project manager, and yes, there's an agreement for the betterment underway, so we can have that information to you, Miles, and we can talk through it ahead of the TPO meeting.
Okay, is there any further discussion? If not, the recommended resolution or the recommended action is on the screen. We'll need a motion in a second, of course.
Mr. Chair, this is Diana. I'll move.
Okay, we have, I'm sorry, they're mowing grass outside my window, but I think we have a motion made by Dorona. Need a second.
This is Mike Cirillo, Planning Director in Powhatan. I'll second.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Seeing no discussion, Janice, if you would please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Miss Amos.
I'm going to abstain. I missed most of the conversation. I apologize.
Right. 1 second. Right. Vice Chair Mitchell. Ms. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Goyne.
Aye.
Chair Vadunez.
Aye.
Ms. Smidler.
Aye.
Ms. Leduc.
Aye.
Mr. Cirillo.
Aye.
Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky.
Aye.
Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
And Ms. Rhodes.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, so the next item is discussion, actually it's an action item concerning the urban boundary smoothing. Let's see, it is 9:49. I'm gonna have to cut out probably partway through this discussion. And Gary, if you would take over on my behalf. But thank you, everybody, if I don't rejoin. Okay. Floor is yours, Chad.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So after every decennial census, the Census Bureau updates its census urbanized area boundary, the UZA, according to specified criteria, mostly related to housing units and population. A lot of times these boundary areas are irregular, and sometimes particularly in areas that are right on the edge of being urban or suburban or rural, those roads may switch between rural and urban status. So FHWA has asks after every census for verification of that UZA, and they at this point VDOT has initiated a review and asked for every MPO and jurisdiction to work together to come up with a recommended boundary. There was an online map link, which was actually linked in the agenda packet if you hadn't seen it before the agenda came out. But we have been working with localities. Sulab has been the primary point of contact on that. To understand any concerns that localities may have regarding that UZA boundary. And we've come back to the TAC today with a recommended boundary, which you can see the map on the screen. A lot of the concerns that were raised were related to the boundary down in the Chesterfield Colonial Heights area. And I know that Barb has worked closely, not just with Sulab, but also with Ron at Tri-Cities to come up with a recommended boundary update to send back to VDOT and subsequently FHWA. So what we have in front of you today is a recommendation that staff is bringing forward that was developed in coordination with the member localities. The action requested is to review the urbanized area boundary and provide a recommendation to the policy board to approve the update as presented. In the packet, there was also an FAQ that was developed by VDOT, and in the last VDOT MPO quarterly meeting, a presentation was given, and that is also included in the packet. So I just wanted to provide you with as much detail as possible so you can make an informed decision and recommendation one way or the other to the policy board. Mr. Chair, that's the presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Yes.
And I know we have, I think Mr. Leeton from VDOT is available as an attendee if there's any questions. And I believe Ms. Rhodes is also available.
Okay, Dorona has a question.
A quick question. Where are the old boundaries, Jet? I mean, I
Jill,
know
feel free to jump in, but I think it's the crosshatched area.
the crosshatch I thought was the UZA, Richmond.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Ian Turner. I work with Charles. We've been the ones doing this smoothing process. The crosshatched area is the 2020 census designated urban area. The 2010 smoothed does not seem to be on this map, but I'll send in the chat a link to a map that you can use to compare everything.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note that we started this process back in, I believe, the first week in June. So it has been fairly lengthy, and there's been a lot of work put into it. So I appreciate everyone's time as we put all our data together to make this update.
Okay, so with that, staff is recommending concurrence with the recommended or the proposed UAB. And so with that, that would then go to the full TPO with a motion in support of that recommendation. Barb.
I was just wondering if folks needed time to look at the map that Ian sent in the chat.
I see. Dorona.
Yeah, and the I don't know which map it is, but I think so. If somebody can help me with one thing, so we see the old UZA and then this proposed UAB. Does it turn to UAB, or is it what we're submitting to be the new UZA? Sorry.
I can take that. So UZA just means urbanized area, and UAB is urban area boundary. So urbanized area is only defined by the census. UAB is just our own VDOT designated term for smoothed urban area boundary. This does not replace what the census gave us. This is just to be used for planning purposes. It's used primarily for functional classification and for roadway design.
Thank you. And just, I guess, a little bit, Mr. Chair, to the TAC, you know, I'm used to UZA being for transit, and so that's why I was getting a little bit confused, but it looks like maybe a highway planning tube in terminology. So I think I'm okay with it if they're saying, I don't think it impacts any funding.
That's right. It doesn't impact any funding.
Okay.
I think we decided the only thing it impacts is if you wanted to, if you were designing a road, if you were in the urban area boundary, you'd need to use urban standards versus rural standards, and there's kind of some pros and cons to those. But I couldn't really figure out what was, if one was better or worse, so.
Yeah, so it's not a fully rigid boundary. You can still use a rural designation in the smoothed area boundary and vice versa, but it's just a general guideline.
Oh, good. That's good to know. Thanks, Ian.
Yep.
And this is Sulabh. Just wanted to add that if the road is within the urban area boundary, then it can be listed in the Federal Highway Performance Monitoring System, HPMS.
Yeah. And the only funding thing it would ever possibly go into is rural minor collectors that would, like, they would normally be rural, but they're in our smoothed urban boundary, but not in the census designated, may be eligible for certain federal sources of funding, but that only applies to like probably around 15 roads per MPO. So.
Has Joe left?
Yes, Gary, the floor is yours.
Any further discussion?
I'll make a motion to recommend, I'm trying to find the, I'll make a motion to recommend the adoption of the smoothed urban area boundary.
I'll second, Diana.
Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mitchell, Diana, I second, Richmond.
I got you.
Oh, sorry.
Any discussion on the motion?
Oh, discussion, sorry.
If not, I guess we can call the question.
Amos,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mitchell,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goyne,
Aye.
Ms. Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Leduc,
Aye.
Mr. Sorello, Ms. Clark,
Aye.
Mr. Binsky,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
and Ms. Rhodes.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, next item, I think, is up to Mr. Miles again. Item 13, correct?
Thank you again. This is my last item for you today. So this is going back to the TIP illustrative project list that we had discussed earlier in the spring. As you'll recall, federal regulations allow us to have a vision list in the TIP. So it's a near-term vision list. VDOT does not have a vision list in the STIP, but other states do provide models for what that could look like. So after discussing with VDOT, we're moving forward with this. The projects would still have to be amended into the constrained TIP, just like the usual amendment process when they do receive funding. But the main goal of this is for us to show that the projects are a near-term priority for the MPO for discretionary grants and earmarks. And it's essentially a standing endorsement list for those applications, which might be seeking several different funding sources. So what we've provided is two attachments to this document. The first is the previous endorsements. We tried to capture all of the discretionary grant applications that weren't successful that have come through the MPO over the past few years. And then the second is a draft project list of what would go into that illustrative project list. And what we did for that list was pull from the LRTP to kind of match up the project with the previous endorsement to try and give you a list of actual projects to review. So what we're requesting from the TAC membership is that you review the list of projects that have been previously endorsed, make sure we didn't miss anything on that side, and then look at the draft project list as well, which are the draft tip blocks, and make sure that those details look correct for what we would put into the illustrative project list. Our goal is to have this added into the FY24 to FY27 tip this fall. So when we do the rollover with all of the project changes that need to get incorporated, we can also add the illustrative project section. Since it's just illustrative, it's not within the constrained plan, it doesn't impact conformity, so it'll be an easy thing to add. So that's the request right now. If you can have those details to us by the end of this month, if there's any changes, that would be great. That way we can bring them back to you next month for the TAC meeting. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Miles, if you could maybe send out, or somebody could send out an email to the TAC group just for those who have needed to jump off the call, just to let them know the deadline and to review that, that would be helpful.
Yep, we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
So we have no motion that's needed on this, so we can move on to the next item. Everybody's ready? That would be the transportation agency updates, starting with the RRTP.
Good morning. So I have only a couple items for today's update. First of all, we are hosting this Friday, August 11th from 10 to 11:30, our post-award workshop. So for any of our eligible applicants who receive any kind of funding award from our grant application cycle, this is a workshop to help with grants administration, any updates to processes, and to provide a question and answer opportunity to DRPT staff. I will provide in the agency update, there'll be a chance to still register. And so I do also encourage any MPO staff or localities who may be just curious about our grants programs, and I know I say it ad nauseum, but we do always welcome the opportunity for you to learn more about DRPT and the programs that we administer. Second is just a quick note. I know VDOT covers a lot about the SIP, but CTV did approve our FY24 through 29 6-year improvement program. Really, that is only for FY24 for us. But we did allocate about $6.3 billion in funding to public transportation and rail programs. We are administering these funds currently and releasing those contracts over the next few weeks. And there's more information if you want to see what we did award on DRPT's open data portal. The last thing I wanted to note was that a notice of funding opportunity came out just, I think, yesterday from FTA for transit-oriented development planning. I'll provide information in my agency update, but this is a funding program that is available to communities to integrate land use and transportation planning in new fixed guideway and core capacity transit project corridors. This is really focusing on any kind of comprehensive or site-specific planning, and it has to examine ways to improve economic development and ridership potential, as well as fostering multimodal connectivity and accessibility, improving transit access for pedestrian and bicycle traffic, trying to engage in terms of partnerships with the private sector and identifying infrastructure needs. So I encourage a lot of our localities or MPOs or even anyone who may have some relationships with transit agencies to explore this opportunity. Proposals must be submitted by October 10th. And then that's all I have for my update.
Okay, GRTC, a report.
Thank you. Yes. I'm going to start off with our north-south pulse BRT study. So progress continues for the potential north-south corridor. That's going to expand our pulse service. It's entering the final phase. We're having wrapped up multiple rounds of public engagement, which narrowed down the study area. So questions that still remain for the north-south are the path that we would take along the downtown area and where we would cross the river. All scenarios include at least one shared stop along the current poles for connectivity. All current routing also uses Chamberlain Road towards Azalea as the northbound portion. So we are working with our project consultant team to weigh the remaining potential routes, incorporate feedback, and develop a final proposal. For our downtown transfer station, our DTS, the paving is done and signs are going up on the new property. It's on track to open September 10th, which is in coordination of our September booking. It's going to include transit-specific wayfinding and well-lit areas. So this will be a really nice transfer facility. GRTC is kicking off our 50th year anniversary. So you'll see new logos that incorporate that 50 in them around. And they've also have done a rebranding for the name. So instead of GRTC Transit System, we'll simply be known as GRTC. And then I do have a quick update for our TSP, our Transit Strategic Plan as well. Pull that up. Sorry. Just when you think you have everything in place. Okay. So the TSP project, we have wrapped up a lot of public engagement, especially going into the priorities for how the public and stakeholders would like to see our 10-year plan priorities lie. So we have also done our origin and destination survey as part of that effort. And right now we are underway on our service planning efforts. So I did want to take a second just to let some of the jurisdictions know that we are going to be reaching out. So look for the emails from us if you don't mind this month to do a little more service planning efforts for all of the 9 jurisdictions. And then we will have another round of engagement late fall, early winter, and that's going to be based on the recommendations that the consultants come up with to include in the 10-year plan. So we look forward to having a lot of support from this group for that and kind of pushing out that effort and that survey as well. And that is it for agency updates.
Thank you. And lastly, I see that Ride Finder is not available. So Ms. Rhodes with VDOT, you have anything?
Yes, good morning. I'll make this brief. The revenue sharing and TA application cycle, we just completed the pre-application screening for both programs in July. So everything is now in the hands of central office and we'll start getting feedback back to applicants. Probably next week is when CO closes out their screening and we move into full apps open for both programs on the 15th of August. July was a very big month for Smart Scale at the CTB level. The CTB not only had a workshop presentation, but they also had a retreat, a 6-hour Smart Scale event that I got to attend. It was very, very interesting. So we do have some changes coming to the Smart Scale program. Those are currently being itemized and I will bring them back to the TAC at your September meeting. I would like to make you aware that in the month of November, there will be a virtual town hall related to the Smart Scale changes that will allow for public feedback on what's going on with that program. However, at any point in the process, you all are more than welcome to email me. And I can get those talking points up the chain to OIP as this development changes progresses. The written report has updates on the Fall Line Trail and the GAP project, so you can reference that. And I think that's everything I have for today. So thank you.
Thank you. I guess we're now down to future meeting topics. And being that I am acting chair, I just have a question because I heard people talk about funding shortfalls and things we have to do. And I don't know, is there any thought been put into, and maybe you've already done this, but you know, we're looking at possibility of a economy slowing down, and do we already have like a rainy day fund so that any projects that are in the pipeline will continue continue before you say, well, we can't do any more projects right now because we got money? Is there like a contingency like that setting around? Or is it a situation that if we don't use all the money, we lose it?
Yes, we have a reserve for each year, and the funding framework sets out the policy, but it increases the farther out we go since there's more uncertainty.
Okay, I was just wondering if that, if that was planned. With that, any other member comments? I don't hear anything. I don't see anything, any chats going up. So I'll say that we will adjourn, and our next meeting will be the 12th of September at 9 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hope I did okay as an acting chairman.
Good job.
You did great, Gary. Thank you.